5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to your post-qualifying Chequered Flag podcast. We actually recorded the original podcast a few hours ago, but there has been a significant change to the starting grid for the Grand Prix here in Qatar. So I've dragged myself out of bed. I have to confess I am in my pyjamas because Max Verstappen, who took pole position for the Qatar Grand Prix, has been given a penalty. So I've managed to convince the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson and our lead commentator Harry Benjamin to join me in this midnight discussion of penalties handed out by the stewards. Andrew, Max Verstappen took pole position under the lights here in Doha, Qatar, but at 11:15, he was summoned to the stewards with George Russell, the Mercedes driver, because... Tell us why.
Well, Russell talked about it after qualifying. They sort of tangled on their slow laps. Russell claimed that he was doing the right speed and Verstappen was going too slowly, and Russell had to take avoiding action and went off into the gravel. And the stewards looked at it and they've penalised Verstappen for driving unnecessarily slowly on a cool-down lap. Russell claimed after qualifying, actually, that he thought this had cost him pole position because his tyres weren't in the right window when he turned into the first corner. And Verstappen's been given a one-place penalty. Now, that's pretty unusual. Normally, this would be a three-place penalty. But the stewards say there were mitigating factors that basically that both of the cars were not on a flying lap at the time. Still, I'm sure there will be some people up and down the paddock, probably in the Mercedes team particularly, who are a bit confused as to where this one-place penalty came from. But one place it is. So the front row's basically been reversed. So Russell now on pole and Verstappen now second.
Harry, when we recorded some of our best work, I have to say, the podcast earlier on, we all sort of said, oh, that'll be a nothing. That might be a reprimand, I think our colleague Sam Bird, the Formula E driver for McLaren, he sort of said that won't amount to anything. And yet here we are a few hours on. So it's obviously taken them a while because the penalty decision came out about half an hour ago, 1:15 local time in Qatar. So they've been in discussions, obviously, for quite a long time, deciding what to do. But it feels like people thought it wasn't going to amount to anything, and yet it has.
Oh, yeah. Morning, Rosanna. I think we all dismissed it, didn't we? And, because neither were on a hot lap. George Russell had been demonstrating throughout the weekend that he was doing 2 build laps, basically, and the second one at pretty much almost full whack before he would put in a proper flying lap. So that's, I think, why we thought, well, actually, it would probably get away with it because how much did it really cost Russell? It's hard to tell. But at the end of the day, they have given that one-place grid penalty. I was actually trying to find if there ever has been a one-place grid penalty. So far, I have yet to find that. I don't think there has been, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. I found 2 places given to George Russell and the 2 Alpines at the Brazilian Grand Prix last year after qualifying, and that was also for impeding in qualifying. So we have seen disparity in terms of how many places a driver can be docked. I think it's fair enough. It's only one. I don't think he deserves more than that, and I still think it sets us up quite nicely for the race. Russell has been on fire all weekend long anyway, but equally, it was a firecracker of a lap from Verstappen as well. And neither were affected, their fastest laps at least, were affected when it counted.
Yeah, you're right. It was an amazing lap set by Max Verstappen to take pole. But as we've said, he's got a one-place grid drop for the Grand Prix and he's been given 1 penalty point. He's now got a total of 6 during this 12-month period. So
just to pick you up on that, Ashley, I'm not giving an opinion myself, Harry, but Russell himself said his lap was affected. He said he told Rosanna that he thought he would have improved on his second lap, because he had improved on his second lap every time, and he didn't actually improve on that lap. I think he was 2 or 3 tenths slower. So that was his argument, that this did basically cost him pole position. And if we remember, I think he was a little bit annoyed about that, especially because he'd also lost pole for the sprint race, not through anybody else's fault, but because he'd kind of confused his car, believe it or not, by he'd taken the last of the flat out right hand, the last of the fast right handers towards the end of the lap flat out for the first time. So the engine hadn't realised he'd gone through a corner and hadn't deployed the hybrid boost after that corner, which cost him a little bit. So that, it would have been 2 in a row for Russell. So I think he'll be feeling vindicated for his argument that Verstappen did really cost him pole, even if it wasn't on a flying lap when the incident happened.
Strange one. Very, very strange. You can't make these stories up, can you, in 2024? It's the season that just keeps on giving. So Max Verstappen did set an incredible lap, though, to take pole position. That now obviously doesn't translate into pole for the Grand Prix. He'll line up alongside George Russell, but I spoke to Max just after the qualifying session. Of course, we're now recording this at 10 to 2 local time here in Qatar. So this was a few hours ago before he'd been called to the stewards. And I talked to him about perhaps proving to himself that he was still able to take a pole position in the RB20. This is what he had to say back then.
Well, I mean, if the car is in a better window and just operating a bit more normal, then I can also drive more on the limit of the car. And that was definitely the case in qualifying now. Much better balance, just a normal balance. And then I was very happy and confident and happy, of course, to be on pole now.
And when it comes to the race, then, are you going to feel more confident in that sort of trim as well?
Well, I mean, I think it's still going to be tough in the race. I don't think necessarily our car at the moment is always like very quick in the race, but at least it's more promising. And I hope that tomorrow at least, we can be in that fight. If we're going to be quick enough, I don't know, but we're going to give it a good go.
Max Verstappen chatting to me a little earlier on in the media pen, and of course now he will start from P2 on the grid, a little dustier, a little dirtier on that side of the grid. So advantage George Russell. George Russell has had a great weekend, guys, and of course, as you say, Andrew, vindicated now perhaps with this penalty given to Max Verstappen and now awarded pole position. He's in a great place, isn't he? He's really feeling comfortable with that Mercedes car.
Yeah, it's been quite the turnaround, hasn't it? Front row in Brazil, admittedly that was in the wet, some other mitigating circumstances there. But again, in the dry in Las Vegas, where he won very convincingly. And now in Qatar, 2 smooth circuits. They weren't expecting to be that quick in Las Vegas, despite the lack of bumps, because the corner profiles are not really what Mercedes like. Whereas in Qatar, they are medium and high-speed corners. We cast our minds back to Silverstone and Spa, where Mercedes won in the summer, similar sorts of corner profiles, medium and high-speed most of the way. So this was very much a Mercedes circuit, and Russell's really gone with it.
He said in those Parc Fermé interviews straight away as he got out of the car that the pace is real. Of course, at the time, I think he felt he'd been cheated out of pole position. Now he will start from that perfect P1 slot on the grid for the Grand Prix. But this is what he had to say to me when I spoke to him about that pace and what it means for the race itself.
When it comes down to that last lap, putting new tyres on, you expect to improve. But I obviously had a very scrappy outlap, almost had the crash with Max. I ended up in the gravel 2 corners before starting my lap, and I didn't go faster. Whereas every lap all weekend, I've been going faster and faster. So the potential was absolutely there. But P2, 4th race in a row now, we're on the front row. I'm proud of that.
So sort of scuppered by Verstappen. Could you have actually responded to Verstappen, do you think, this evening? That time was pretty impressive from him, but was that time in the car?
Yeah, absolutely. It was in the car because the track gets faster every single lap, and most drivers on their last lap improve a 10th or 2. I was confident I could have achieved the same, but as soon as I got to turn 1, the car and the tyres didn't feel quite right. Which, as I said, I was in the gravel 2 corners before I started my lap. So it was a shame that it ended that way. I would have, if I lost the pole in if it was everything was on the table, then you say, okay, fair enough. But now it's just like what could have been. But I'm just taking the positives with everything right now.
So Harry, of course, George was stating a bit of a claim there. I think probably trying to convince the stewards that it was worth taking a look at that incident with himself and Max Verstappen. Of course, that has now paid dividends, and he will start from P1. Do you think he can hold on to that, though, especially with a Max Verstappen alongside him going into turn 1? There are going to be elbows out. I know there's not a driver's title at stake, but George Russell is pumped up and surely wants to take another win, a back-to-back win.
Yeah, I reckon he could. I mean, I reckon he stood a good chance going from second place if the original grid was standing. Russell seems fired up at the moment. I think he's felt a bit like he's been hard done by almost all weekend long. After the sprint, felt like, McLaren were able to orchestrate that race. It was 2-1 when it came to McLaren versus Mercedes. He wasn't too happy about that after the sprint. He's fired up after Las Vegas, where he was absolutely flawless from FP1 onwards. He's been in actually quite a rich vein of form over the last 5 races or so. You go back to Sao Paulo as well, and the mixed conditions there, were qualified on the front row, could have won that race were it not for the safety car and the red flag interventions and the strategy call going the wrong way for him. I think he knows he can close the season off really strongly, and perhaps this is another step forward for Mercedes if they can keep it consistently. I really think that Russell will be in the fight. I still think it's going to be a dogfight out there, though, over the course of the 50-some laps that we'll get under the lights.
I kind of hope so, because it's a bit of a difficult track to get overtaking done. So I hope we see a little bit of wheel-to-wheel action tomorrow under the lights. I think that will be our just reward for staying up so late to talk about it all, don't you think? I think we should be treated to a special, maybe not spectacular Grand Prix. But now it's going to get a little strange, because I'm going to hand you back to the original podcast. And on the original podcast, we had the McLaren Formula E driver, Sam Bird, with us, because he's been in commentary with you guys as well. Yes. He doesn't get out of bed for quite a handy sum of money, so it's just the three of us. But I'll hand back to me in the original podcast, because we're going to talk about the McLaren drivers now. They were unable to get onto the front row. I think they wanted to lock out the front row, of course, but definitely wanted to out-qualify Ferrari. Sam, was it a disappointing evening for the McLaren team?
Oh, you did throw that to me. Okay.
Take your McLaren shirt off, Samuel.
I think there will be... They'll be a little bit disappointed, but right now, looking at the bigger picture, their sole goal is to beat Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. Obviously, the Drivers' Championship is gone. Max Verstappen is the world champion. Lando Norris will want to hang on to second, which I think he will, personally. But they'll be a little bit disappointed that they're off the pace in comparison to Max Verstappen and George Russell. I think they realise that they're going to be in for a hard fight tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. But good news for them that Ferrari are behind them.
What's interesting for me, Rosanna, this weekend actually is that McLaren were expecting this to be their strongest circuit of the final 3, and it hasn't been. Well, actually, it has been, but it's compared to Las Vegas at least, but it's not as strong as they expected. They thought they would be ahead, not behind Red Bull and Mercedes here. So it'd be interesting to see whether they can match that pace in the race that they were expecting to have, because of course it's not always the same. Sometimes McLaren they do come on strong in longer stints. So but just a little bit of an alarm bell there for them. But they are still ahead of the Ferraris, and they've got a decent points advantage in the constructors. I think even if it goes to Abu Dhabi, they should be reasonably confident of hanging on to that first place.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to Lando Norris about when he came into the pen earlier on, because I'm sure there were 2 objectives heading into that qualifying session: to lock out the front row and to out-qualify the 2 Ferraris. So I wanted to know how satisfied he was with their outcome.
As satisfied as I can be, because I felt like I did a good lap. I got everything out of the car, but we just weren't quick enough today. So, a little bit of a shame, but that's the way it is. It means we did a very good job yesterday in getting the car in a good window, and the others didn't. And we maximised yesterday, and the others didn't. And today was... we still maximised our potential, but everyone else's potential was much higher than ours. So it just put us back a little bit, but nothing to be disappointed by. I think we got everything out of it. Just the car wasn't quick enough.
So there was no way, even if you'd had another lap, for example, that you could have ever responded to a lap like that from Verstappen?
No chance.
That was Lando Norris. Pretty emphatic then. He didn't have the pace, or at least the McLaren car didn't have the pace to match Max Verstappen. So that time that Verstappen set really was in a league of its own.
Yeah, it was, and it just sort of reiterates what a surprise that was, and how well
he and that Red Bull team work. With the Parc Fermé rules changing in between, the sprint opening up again for the race, it just outlines how strong they were. But I still feel that Norris and the McLaren will play their part in the Grand Prix. I think they will be strong, and I think we're actually going to get a proper four-way fight for the win. I reckon four-way fight. That's what I'm going to go for, and the McLarens are going to be in there.
Which four?
Well,
yeah, which four?
Verstappen, Russell, Norris, and then I'm going to go for. I think Leclerc will stick his nose in there.
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think it's a three-way fight. I think the first three that you said. I think that Piastri's not quite there at the moment. Something's been a little bit missing recently. He's still mega fast and a super talent for the future. Just recently, Lando's had the edge on him. So for me, it's between Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, and George Russell.
I mean, basically, Norris has had the edge on Piastri all year. That's the bottom line. There's been a couple of races where Piastri's beaten him, but when he won in Baku, Norris had a problem with the yellow flags in qualifying. When he won in Hungary, Norris had out-qualified him, but he just beat him off the line. It's actually, since Monaco was apart from the sprint race in Brazil, Monaco was the last time Piastri out-qualified Lando Norris. So Piastri is a great talent for the future, but Norris has definitely put him in his place pace-wise this year.
Interestingly, Oscar Piastri actually said the car felt mega this evening, so I think he did all he could, and that was only P4, but right there with his teammates. So it's two McLarens versus one Red Bull and one Mercedes up at the front. So again, they could do something interesting with strategy. Not that you can be too creative around here, but it'll be interesting to see their approach given how much is at stake in the Constructors' Championship. So P4 for Oscar Piastri, and behind him is Charles Leclerc, the lead Ferrari, ahead of Lewis Hamilton in P6. So Ferrari unable to get really in amongst it. And okay, Harry, you thought Charles Leclerc could try and get a little further up the grid tomorrow, but how likely is it? The Ferrari seem to struggle on this track.
Yeah, I don't think they're struggling as much as or at least they made it sound like they would, but nonetheless they are on the back foot. The possible, the graining issues that they're experiencing when we're getting slightly colder temperatures. We're nowhere near as cold as Vegas, of course, but they really struggled with that. Equally, the long duration corners that this circuit has make it more difficult for that Ferrari to work. My assumption is going off the sprint, which yes is only the first 19 laps, and they weren't playing for 1, 2 and 3, but Sainz and Leclerc weren't massively adrift from that front field, and if something happens up front, if somebody is off the pace, if there's some carnage, they will be there to pounce.
Yeah, Ferrari are there or thereabouts. It's just the strengths, the real strengths we've seen from their package this year have tended to be in slightly slower speed corners or heavier braking zones. These are all long, prolonged corners and all high and medium speed corners, which tends to lend itself towards the Mercedes car or the McLarens, and obviously the package of the Red Bull tends to be pretty good everywhere.
And I think Carlos Sainz was saying, if it starts to become about tyre management, that could see them do a little bit better during the Grand Prix. So sandwiched in between the two Ferraris in P6 is Lewis Hamilton. It has been a really difficult weekend for Lewis Hamilton. Just a couple of rounds ago in Sao Paulo, it sounded like he was almost signing off from the team, almost alluding to not going to sort of turn up in Las Vegas, and even for the rest of the season, the different rounds still to come. But here we are in Qatar. He is here, but my goodness me, he is cutting a very dejected figure, sort of scuffing his feet, moving quite slowly across the media pen to talk to people. It's been a really tough sort of 36 hours for him, hasn't it?
I'm definitely not fast. I really don't care. These are the words that the 7-time world champion has used across this weekend. And for a man that was so full of confidence last week in Vegas, he had a poor qualifying, but he carved his way through the field. But almost that compounds what's going on this weekend, because he's not able to back up that great form the next week after, when his teammate can, and that's what's getting Lewis Hamilton down. His highs are high, but his lows are low, and this roller coaster that he rides in between them all absolutely migrates so quickly from top to bottom. He's been out-qualified by his teammate George Russell 18-5 this season. He hasn't had a top 5 start in the last 5 races. For me,
the more I've thought this for a little while, but the comments this weekend that he's been making have confirmed it to me, that Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, I think, have fallen out of love with each other, and I think he is checked out, and he wants this season done. He can't explain his reasons for not being there on one lap pace, and we know he's Lewis Hamilton. He's fast. I don't think he's lost skill. I just think mentally he's ready for a new challenge, and so too are Mercedes.
Well, let's hear from Lewis Hamilton, who was talking to me after qualifying, and I asked him why it was such a tricky session.
I mean, it wasn't a tricky session. I just my laps were pretty decent. Just half a second off.
Are you getting exactly the same as George is getting with the car at the moment?
That I couldn't tell you. I assume so.
Assume so.
Well, you assume that everyone's doing the same thing, and I set my car up a little bit different today, or into this session, and the car honestly felt great. The car felt, it's the first time we've made a setup change and the car actually felt good. My laps are generally really good. They come across the line and it's half a second down.
So that was Lewis Hamilton. He qualified P6. Guys, he assumes he's getting the same car as George Russell. It didn't sound like he was totally confident. Surely he sees everything, Andrew, in those data briefing sessions, the engineering debriefs. Surely he would know, surely.
Yeah, and I'm sure he is getting the same car as Anna. Why would Mercedes want to give him a different car than George Russell? I mean, I don't know what's going on, but something's obviously not right with Lewis Hamilton at the moment. I don't believe, he's not 4.5 tenths slower than George Russell, is he? If everything's normal, I think Harry's probably right. I think he probably doesn't want to think that this has happened, but I think his head's in a different place. He's had it with Mercedes, not because of any particular reason, just because it's not been a great season. The car's not doing what he wants. He's not particularly comfortable in it, and he's got a new job around the corner, and we're all human, aren't we? Even 7-time world champions who hold all the Formula One records.
Yeah. The thing is, everyone keeps on saying, he's already seeing red, he's thinking about Ferrari, he's looking to the new opportunity, the new job. But then in the sprint race, he was overtaken by Charles Leclerc, his future teammate. So is that another sort of self-doubt moment, do you think?
I don't think self-doubt, Rosanna. I think Leclerc just had more pace at that point. It was a really great battle between the two of them, actually. It was really, if they're going to race like that together as Ferrari teammates, I can't wait for next year.
That was probably the best bit of action from the whole race,
It
actually.
was, yeah, side by side through 4 corners. Leclerc pulled it off in the end. Look at Fernando Alonso. He's still performing at the age of 43. By the way, it's just a quick word for him. He did an excellent job in the Aston Martin. He's in the top 10, just qualified 8th, was 7 tenths quicker than his teammate Lance Stroll in Q2. He didn't get through. So if Alonso can do it at 43, Hamilton can do it at 39. I think he just needs to get out of Mercedes and get into his new home and get on with it.
And perhaps have a good winter break spent with maybe friends and family, go out to his ranch in Colorado. Does he still have that? I think he does. Get some fresh air in the old lungs and come back ready for next season.
Yeah, he's got houses all over the place, Rosanna, hasn't he?
Nice holiday in Norfolk by the seaside. I'm sure he's lining that one up as well.
Hamilton's welcome to come and frequent East Anglia whenever he pleases, Harry Benjamin. Well, Andrew, you said, of course, Fernando Alonso qualified in P8. That was ahead of Sergio Perez, P9. So again, an absolute divide between Max Verstappen on pole and his teammate Sergio Perez. It's been a very interesting evening for him. I think we can probably move on now to the sprint, which actually leads us nicely into it, talking about Sergio Perez. What was going on there? He started the sprint from the pit lane and he got overtaken when the light went green. Franco Colapinto in the Williams, also starting from the pit lane, decided to get around the stationary Red Bull. Absolute chaos.
It was another embarrassing moment for Sergio Perez in an embarrassing year for him. 9 tenths slower than Max Verstappen in qualifying for the Grand Prix. As you say, Rosanna, he was waiting at the end of the pit lane with Colapinto coming up behind him, both of them starting there because of Parc Fermé irregularities. The green light went on and Perez just sat there, and Colapinto came past him, and Perez's excuse was, I was looking for some free air. We wanted to have a gap so we could test the car. Well, you don't do that by letting a slower car past you at the end of the pit lane and then spending the first half of the race just a second behind its gearbox, do you? So, I think what he was trying to say say, but I was waiting because I wanted a gap to the rest of the field, and he just hadn't engaged his brain and realised that there was a car behind him. But do
you think that's a sort of slack conversation between himself and Hugh Bird, his race engineer? Maybe they should have been telling him?
I don't know, but I think what was more telling was that Christian Horner didn't even try to defend him, and he's been trying his best to defend Perez all year. In fact, all last year as well. He's been quite rubbish for, basically the last 20 months or so, basically since Verstappen won in Miami in 2023. It feels like time's running out for Perez at Red Bull, Rosanna, to be honest, but who knows whether they'll actually, bite the bullet and get rid of him, because it's not easy. We've been talking about this all year. It's not that easy to see who they would replace him with.
There are meant to be shareholder talks, aren't there, at the end of the season? Do you think that really will be crunch time, or do you think he's going to have even more sort of lives?
I honestly don't know. I mean,
course?
It was supposed to be crunch time at the end of last year. It was supposed to be crunch time in the summer break, despite the fact that he'd just been given a new 2-year contract. It's probably going to be crunch time again at the end of this season. But, how many times have we been over this? They don't seem to fancy Yuki Tsunoda, or someone doesn't seem to fancy Yuki Tsunoda there. Liam Lawson's not making a strong enough case at the moment. They've been talking about Franco Colapinto, but he's had 3 crashes in the last 2 races in Williams, and so, as I say, it's a difficult choice for them.
Their junior driver as well, Isaac Hadjar, who's the F2 frontrunner, hasn't had the best start to the weekend at F2, had an unnecessary spin in that race as well, while battling for the lead. So Andrew's absolutely right. There isn't a logical person to replace Perez with, but this is actually one of Perez's better weekends when it comes to qualifying, at least for the Grand Prix in recent times. Unbelievably, hasn't started inside the top 10 I think since Austin, so it's better in that respect. But I do feel a little bit for Perez. His head's gone, and it's been gone for a long time, and I think the bad results are just a result of his mentality going down the drain, essentially, and being relentlessly beaten by Max Verstappen, then also compounded by the Red Bull car losing pace, all of the media talk, all of us talking about Perez and his future. Perez is not as bad a driver as this. There wasn't too long ago that we were all talking about how good Perez was in the midfield. You put him up against someone like Nico Hülkenberg in a Force India back in the day, and Perez was the one who was able to put that car in the podium places, not Nico Hülkenberg. So it is a matter of perspective and how quickly things can change in Formula One. But sometimes you think, it's probably better for both parties, actually, if they depart at the end of the season. But let's hope he has a decent run of form in the race.
Do you think also, if you take a step back, I don't think it's very healthy for a driver to just be continually asked about their future and their performance, and actually there's a level of kind of pastoral care. Christian Horner, by keeping him on, is just subjecting Sergio Perez to more scrutiny, and that is not good for an athlete. It's not good for a human, actually.
No, it's not. It's unhealthy. It's a difficult place to be, and I feel for him in that respect. It's not fun. He will be questioning when he goes home. He'll be looking at himself in the mirror and thinking, am I good enough now? Do I want this enough anymore? I've made millions and millions in the bank. Do I need to be subjecting myself to this ridicule week in, week out? He'll know what everybody's saying, and he also knows that he's been a race-winning driver. I think a change would do him some good, a fresh start, whether that be in Formula One or a different racing series. That is, if he wants to race at all anymore.
So we've spoken about the pit lane start for Sergio Perez and Franco Colapinto in the Williams. Let's talk about the sprint race as a whole then, because it was looking like Lando Norris was going to take the win. And then, Harry, your commentary had to change its tune a little, didn't it? Because suddenly Lando Norris pulled to one side and Oscar Piastri, his teammate, went on to take the checkered flag and the win.
Just as I was puffing out my chest, getting ready for the line of Norris winning the sprint, suddenly, he's pulled over to the side of the road. What's gone on? And that was close as well. Fine margins for Norris to hand the win to Piastri right on the exit of the final corner, because George Russell was right there as well, and all it took was one small misjudgment from Norris, and he might well have found himself down in third. Look, I actually think it's quite admirable of Lando Norris to do that. We quickly worked out that was him repaying his teammate Oscar Piastri for giving up the Sao Paulo sprint win when Norris was still mathematically in contention of the title against Verstappen. So I think that it's quite nice from Norris. It's, you know, we live in this cutthroat sport where, you know, we don't see these kind of things happen very regularly, but I think it's indicative of what Andrea Stella has put, the team principal, has instilled in the McLaren team since he's taken the reins. He wants a harmonious team. He wants a team that is functioning on all fronts, and they want to clinch the Constructors' title. It will be their first since 1998, and they want to enter 2025 all guns blazing with two of the hottest properties on the grid in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and I think sort of that was kind of demonstrating that, and it sounds like the whole idea stemmed from Lando Norris anyway, which is quite nice. But the other question is, well, would any number one cutthroat driver ever allow that to happen? I'm not sure about that, but it threw us all off. But in the end, McLaren still scooped the maximum points from the sprint.
Yeah, Lando Norris, I think, had that idea up his sleeve for probably all of that sprint race, all 19 laps of it. And you were trying to change your commentary. Yeah, you were changing your commentary. I actually missed the move because I was moving through to the pit lane to talk to some of the team principals at the end of the sprint. And one of them, happily, was the team principal of McLaren, Andrea Stella. And I asked him about that late in the day choreography of Lando Norris handing the win to Oscar Piastri. This is what he had to say.
Well, it was more than wild. I think it was tense. And one of the reasons is that Ferrari was on new tyres effectively. It was just a set scrubbed in practice. Russell had a set with only one time lap on. We were on a set with 2 time laps on, which takes away some performance of the car. And this meant that we needed to defend today. And with the headwind and the long straight and the big rear wing we are running, we were exposed down the straight. So it required some collaboration between Lando and Oscar, which our two boys executed very well. I have to say, brilliant drive by Lando, very precise. And this allowed us to finish on a 1-2. And then Lando took the opportunity at the end to return the favor that Oscar did to him in Brazil in the sprint event, which again shows the values that our drivers bring. We were a little nervous because Russell was so close, so we said to Lando, like, no worries. Obviously Lando had the situation under control and he managed to get the swap done.
No worries. Did you actually say that on the team radio?
We didn't say no worries. This is the version for the post-sprint interviews. No, really very proud of both Lando and Oscar today. Very important points, fantastic driving, very good information acquired also for what we need for the race. We look forward to the rest of the weekend.
So just to give you the top 5 in that sprint race, it was Oscar Piastri who then eventually took the win. Lando Norris P2 ahead of George Russell, who was definitely frustrated that team orders from McLaren played out and stopped him from potentially even obtaining a P2 or even the win. Then it was Carlos Sainz ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc. And then it was Lewis Hamilton, P6, so not managing to make it into the top 5. And Max Verstappen, who eventually went on to take pole position for the Grand Prix, was down in P8. So you can see why we were all surprised that he went on to take P1 later on in qualifying. That's why we were all so surprised. But I think, guys, it sets things up nicely for the Grand Prix itself, doesn't it?
It does indeed. I'm hoping we're going to get a little more action across 57 laps than we did across 19 laps, but there was some nice dicing in the sprint, like we said, between Leclerc and Hamilton, which I think we should be able to see more of. The tyre strategy will, of course, become more of a factor too. Temperatures. It's a fast-paced track, and I think we're on, as I said earlier, I'm going to go for a 4-way fight.
Well, what's quite exciting for me as well, Rosanna, is the fact that McLaren kind of played the team game in the sprint race, with Lando Norris always giving Oscar Piastri the tow. We've got 3 different cars. You've got a Red Bull, a Mercedes and a McLaren, all fighting against each other for the top 3 places tomorrow. So we won't see those tactics employed for the win of the race, which is really, really exciting.
I think it bodes really well. I'm really looking forward to it. Verstappen against Russell, I think that could get quite tasty. especially after what happened in qualifying. And the two McLarens right behind them, Leclerc right behind them. Constructors' Championship, McLaren only have to finish first and second with fastest lap, only, in inverted commas, to clinch the Constructors. I don't think they will do that tomorrow, but there's a lot at stake, and Verstappen and Russell are just racing for pride and a Grand Prix victory, so it could be a really good Grand Prix. It's difficult to overtake at this track, but it's high speed, it's tense, it's demanding, it's going to really put the drivers through the mill, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Hugely physical. Lando Norris saying he's going to have to hit the gym a little bit more, because I think the G that the drivers are being subjected to is fairly high, about 5G around some of the long sweeping curves of this Losail International Circuit. So as the guys have said, plenty to look out for in the Grand Prix, and it almost sets things up nicely for next weekend, because don't forget, this is the second part of the final triple header of the season. We head to Abu Dhabi next weekend, and perhaps the Constructors' Championship will go all the way down to the wire, given where McLaren are starting in the Grand Prix tomorrow. Harry, Sam, Andrew, thank you so much for helping me look back at that qualifying session and the sprint race. It's been a busy evening here in Qatar. We'll meet again for the Grand Prix, though. Still plenty more action to come from the desert, but it was Max Verstappen, the four-time world champion, on pole position. Who'd have thought that, eh? This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.